Good morning and welcome to Writers Chat. We are so glad you're here. And if you're here, especially those of you that are here in our live audience, so to speak, and those of you that are watching the replay, thank you so much. Today, here at Writers Chat, we're the community where I am just blowing this. Anyway, where craft connects community, that's Writers Chat. How about that? I'm Norma Poore, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Melissa Stroh and Brandy Brow. And as you can clearly see, we do not stand on formality around here, but we're glad you're here. We appreciate your being with us or watching us. And without any more blunders, I'm going to just go ahead and pass it on over to Melissa. Take it away.
Now it's my turn to blunder. So, get ready. There may be a few ums and ems going on here, but today we're going to do our traditional book chat. This is kind of a thing we do annually every year. Yes, there you go, because mine I think is reversed. So you can see it better on Brandy's screen. We're going to discuss Cheryl St. John's book, Writing with Emotion, Tension, and Conflict. Now, I know right off the bat, our nonfiction writers in the group might be tempted to tune out because it also says in the subtitle, Techniques for Crafting an Expressive and Compelling Novel. So yes, this book does focus primarily on fiction, but there are a lot of gems hidden in the book that I think are very applicable to nonfiction writers. And we're going to try to share some of those today. So there's some good takeaway if whether you write nonfiction or fiction. So just in a brief overview, I'll kind of just give you a quick view over of what's in the table of contents for this book. It's broken down into 6 parts, I believe. Yep, 6 parts. The first part, 1, deals with conflict, which makes the story. Part 2 is going to deal in once more with feeling and digging a little deeper into the emotional aspects for characters. Part 3 is setting is more than a backdrop. Part 4, tension and pressure. Part 5, dialogue. And part 6, drawing emotions from characters. And we're not going to go over every chapter in this discussion. We're just going to kind of hit some highlight chapters that we thought had some really great content and wanted to share some of those topics with you today. And if you want to know more and you decide you like it, go out and get this book. It's a really good one. I think it's very helpful, especially for as a fiction writer. And that's kind of where I'm coming at it from you today. Although I did find a few things I'll share for nonfiction too. But mostly what I'm going to come at to you with is the things that affect you as a fiction writer. And we're just going to jump right into chapter 1, which hones in on conflict and its purpose and definition in the story. So what is conflict? That was the first thing that was presented. And basically, it's anything that hinders your character. I know that's kind of a simple way of looking at it. And she does go into a little more detail to say that it's not quite as simple as it seems, but that helps you in the broader sense to hone in on the topic itself. In order to have conflict, your character must have a goal and that is believable. So not, I just want unicorns and puppies and all sorts of nice things. No, there has to be a concrete goal that your character wants, and that goal is driving them through the story. Now, she talks about how to make a goal believable. That comes from motivation. And these can fit into one of 3 categories. Sometimes they kind of blend across. I've seen fiction writers do it. But the first category is a possession of something. So your character wants to possess something or someone. Maybe they want a relationship. If you write romance, maybe this character wants a meaningful relationship that they don't have. Or maybe they're in love with somebody who doesn't love them back or doesn't know they exist. But maybe they want to possess something concrete like a job. There's a job that they're aspiring for that they really want to go for. Maybe they're not sure they can get it. Or maybe it's an ideal or something. They want to be wealthy or they want to aspire to greatness or do something meaningful in their life. But maybe they want relief from something. Maybe this character is suffering an illness that they want to be healed of, or maybe they're feeling oppressed in their station in life. Maybe they feel that they're impoverished, or they feel like they're there's too much pressure on them to perform in one way or another. And then the third one is revenge for something. And we know all sorts of stories that fit into that one. We talked to some of the examples given were like Jaws, the revenge against the shark. We're going to go out and get that shark before it gets more people. You can think of all sorts of story examples. Anybody got any that pop in their head right now? You can put them off in the chat, or Brandy or Norma, you can chime in with ones that might fall into any of those three categories that you think of.
I don't know. Pirates of the Caribbean come to mind.
Oh yeah, he definitely wants something. He wants his ship. He wants to
Hmm.
be a captain again, doesn't he? And he's willing to do whatever in order to attain that.
Lots of conflict in that one.
Mm-hmm. And it makes him more fun because he's also a
Yes.
very quirky character.
Yes.
Okay, so that's basically the first chapter there, and a lot of them kind of hone in on conflict. But then we jump into chapter 2, and we're digging a little deeper into motivation and realism and how to bring that about. So basically, on that same line, nothing happens in a vacuum. People can't react without stimuli, something that gets them going. You talked about Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, he's got a definite stimuli going on there. He needs to find his ship, but it's hard to find because the crew are cursed and they don't just show up anywhere. So he's got to rely on a special object, his compass, to find them. And he's also got to get a ship of his own to do it. Yep, Dennis Mike. Conflicts, jobs come up when characters acknowledge love, and boom, job opportunity in another state. Yep. So every character action should have a motivation like that. We see in the instance of Jack Sparrow, he's motivated by the want for his ship. And we get what comes next to develop that motivation. You oftentimes have to develop a character's backstory to make the motivation convincing and lend realism to your character. So, in the case of Jack Sparrow, we learn his backstory peppered throughout. He lost the ship because he was basically shanghaied and marooned. He trusted the wrong people with his treasure, and it got him, but it got them worse. And he kind of lucked out without realizing it. Um, so, in developing your backstory, you will want to develop your character's belief systems. You're going to want to develop their values, family, if that's important to the story, friends and fears and phobias, and the prime motivating incident. So I did this quite a bit in some of my writing. Give just a little example there. One character, Brendan, who became a very popular character in my series, when he comes on the scene, people don't know whether he's good or bad, what's really driving him. But the first, and they oftentimes don't recognize the first time that he shows on board because he appears first as a secondary character. But later on, you get a little insight into his backstory. You see that he's, when you first meet him, he's kind of playing both sides. He's pretending to be for the bad guys, but he's helping the good guys. And you're wondering, well, what's going on with him? Well, you find out that he is bent on revenge. There's a revenge for something. That's his believable motivation because his father was killed by a murderer sent by his uncle. And so he wants revenge against his uncle, and he's pretending to be one of his uncle's henchmen, so to speak, in order to get into that inner circle, infiltrate, and destroy everything his uncle's done. So this unfolds in the backstory, and you know that family and caring about people becomes important to him as we develop him as a character. And it also becomes a weakness, but he's motivated by that inciting incident that his father was killed, and he wants revenge for that. After chapter 2, I'm jumped ahead because character development is one of the biggest things, but we don't want to neglect plot. And in chapter 4, we discuss plot and internal and external conflict and how that affects your characters. Plot is an essential element in the story. Well, what is plot? Sometimes that one's kind of hard to really narrow down because we think of a lot of things when we think about plot, and it can be kind of difficult to create. But basically, Cheryl boils it down to plot is the series of events that keep your characters together until issues are resolved at the end of the book. I think that's pretty simple to remember ultimately. Um, and this plot is driven by both internal and external conflict. Internal conflict, it gives the plot significance and it keeps the characters emotionally at odds until the end of the book. It's based on the ultimate desire, the basic fear, and stems from the backstory of your character's motivation. It prevents characters from getting what they want, and it keeps readers anticipating what will happen next until the opposition is overcome. External conflict is all the things you would think are obvious, like weather, war, separation, sickness, accidents, travel, all the things that can happen externally to your character. And these influence how the characters interact with each other too. External conflict heightens tension and feeds internal conflict. And external motivation is what a character wants. So these things apply into the setting too, like love, money, influence, recognition. They can all be affected by them. Internal motivation is the reason they want what they want. And so you use all these things to interweave and connect and create your plot. And once you've given your story people motivation and goals and create scenes for them to react to, example, the goal would be a character wants recognition, their motivation, the character would be passed over for a previous accomplishment. So once you get all these things together, you've got your plot. Any thoughts on plot and backstory and motivations before I move on to the next thing? I know that I kind of flew over that. Let's see if there were any comments in the chat.
There was just a question about conflict in secondary characters. He said he assumed this extends to secondary characters.
Absolutely. In fact, if they're an important secondary character who really has an influence on your protagonists or even with your antagonists, then you want to develop them. Think about Lord of the Rings and Samwise Gamgee. That is an important secondary character, and he has a lot of motivation. He wants to be there to support Frodo, and he has a lot of things that affect him in his background. You think about internal conflict and motivation. They miss the Shire. They want to protect the Shire, but they don't typically leave the Shire. So being away from it reminds them of all the things that they're missing and they're lacking. They're always reminiscing and having that loss, that homesickness that's present with them. But at the same time, that homesickness, especially in Samwise, drives him on because he wants to support Frodo in the mission to destroy the One Ring, knowing that it's going to save the Shire, it's going to save all the hobbits, and it's going to save Middle Earth. And so Sam is a very important secondary character, and we really come to like him when we discover all of his internal motivations and how he responds to external motivations, like being outside the Shire, being in strange places, and kind of being a little scared to get out and travel. We see Frodo as a character who's a little more ambitious about it because he's got that background from that family background from his uncle. And so while he loves the Shire, he's a little more bold about stepping out and doing what needs to be done. And he kind of cheers Sam on, even though he was hesitant to have him in the first place, not wanting his friend to be hurt. And that those internal and external motivations help build bonds between the characters too. We see how close these two characters are. They're best friends, practically brothers, and they're there to support one another and are essential in the end story to help bring about the ultimate success of their mission.
Makes me think another one that comes to mind is Sherlock and Watson.
Oh yeah,
Is Sherlock without Watson?
A lot of people even argue that Watson really kind of steals the show as the ultimate narrator, but he's always highlighting and focusing in on what Sherlock is doing and kind of drawing your attention to his genius. And in that process, you also get to see a little bit of Watson's genius and intelligence too, and his level-headedness that comes to it, where, Sherlock, depending on the different variations that we've seen over the years, is a little off and being abrasive, not the kind of person that others really connect with. So Watson kind of brings a bit of the humanity and the connection and the warmth that Sherlock absolutely lacks.
Right.
Yeah, the pitfall for developing secondary characters, of course, is that they can rival the main character. So you have to make sure to keep them in their place, not develop them beyond the point of a main character.
Yeah, throttling them back. That's an important balance for sure. Are there any other thoughts before I jump ahead? I'm getting basically to my last chapter that I wanted to cover, which will also kind of connect with nonfiction a little bit too. Well, I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 7, which I liked. We were talking about learning emotional triggers. This is an essential for both nonfiction and fiction. In learning emotional triggers, you need to focus in on tone and atmosphere. And she suggested some exercises you can do to gather this, to get this and add it to your writing, to build yourself as a writer. So the thing she suggested right off the bat was to grab your favorite book and go through it. So think about your favorite book, nonfiction or fiction. Grab that, start pouring through it again. Think about how it makes you feel when you're reading it. So we're basically talking about using a book as a mentor text here. Can't remember if she actually uses that term, but that's basically what we're going into. You think about the overall feeling you get when you're reading the book, how that captures the tone of the book and the impression it left on you, and start making notes as you're going through this book. The specific feelings that you start to relive as you're rereading it. Use the book as a mentor text to study the word choices, the descriptions, the dialogue, the categories, if it's nonfiction, that left such a strong and lasting impression on you. She suggested that you even go so far as to buy a second copy of your favorite book and use it to take notes in, to write your notes in. You don't have to. You could use a notebook too, but to really dig into it. So if there's in the case of fiction, there's a certain scene that just really pops out to you. It really gets an emotional response from you, whether it makes you really sad or really happy or just really drawn in. Dig into it. What are the sentence structures? What are the words used? What is it heavy on action, or is it heavy on description and setting and plot? What are the things that captivate you in it? And write down everything. Make a note of it and really study it. And then you'll see that it starts to kind of give you a lot of aha moments for your own writing. In nonfiction, for sure, think about your favorite how-to or devotional or a study of a certain thing, or maybe a historical subject. How did the author captivate you into that to want to learn more, or to give you your own aha moments? How did they phrase things? What was the structure of the book? Was it, word heavy? Was it bullet pointed? Was there certain things that really helped move you along through it? And these are all essentials to help you develop your own style, not to mimic them or copy them exactly, but to get some good ideas about how you could turn that for your own writing to fit your own voice. She also suggested to keep an emotional journal. That might not be for everybody, but for some people, it's a really handy thing. So you would have a journal that you set aside as your emotional journal. You would write down thoughts and observations of ways you see emotions conveyed and things that make you react. This is especially important for people who are doing character studies or wanting to dig deep into a certain character or personal issue. If you're like addressing that in a nonfiction thing, like maybe people who suffer from depression, you might want to study the signs of depression or how to help those who are struggling with it. So you literally go out into the world and people watch, study people, interact, think about how people respond in conversations. When you say something, what is their physical response? How do their expressions change? What gestures do they use? What clues you into the emotions they're feeling? Write them down. So it's being both a scientist and an author. You're observing the world around you. Maybe you can also, again, we talked about external motivations, setting, and how that affects people. How does a setting that a person's in affect their mood? Maybe you're out walking in a storm, the rain suddenly hits. How do people suddenly respond when they're in a rainstorm? You want to lend that realism to your story, or you want to tie that into some emotional aspect of your nonfiction book. You can observe somebody, write it down, and convey that through story in your works and really hone it in so that people can relate to it. Be alert to conversations that others have. Watch TV and movies with your eyes and ears turned into emotional triggers. There are a lot of movies that convey good emotional resonance. And so observe the actors, the actresses in the movies or the TV shows that you like, and write down their physical responses, their emotional responses, the dialogue, the word choice that they use when they're experiencing that specific emotion. We already discussed how setting creates the mood. And then ultimately, when you're doing all this, you're kind of becoming a bit of a method actor in the end. You're thinking it will cause you some introspection in what you observe too, thinking about how you respond to specific emotions and how you would convey those, be it a character or how you want to convey it relating to somebody in your nonfiction. You know, it's not in this book. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Brandolyn Collins' book, on character development, talking about how most of us just can't picture the kind of anger that would cause you to murder somebody, but we could sure picture our hatred for a fly that's irritating us. And so you would take something relatable like that fly that's irritating you, and you could develop a character who could have that kind of anger lashed out on a fly, only relating it to somebody else, like a person. And like simple things like that you could take and relate to, and connecting with personal experience or a lack thereof. So it might not be something you actually have experienced firsthand, but you can relate in a roundabout way through that, or you have people who have experienced something, and so you can spend time researching and talking with them to get an idea of the feelings and emotions that could affect a plot, both internally and externally, and what would trigger your characters to respond in certain ways, or your reader, what their pain points are if you're writing nonfiction and you want to try to help them through something. Maybe if it's something you haven't fully experienced yourself, but you have a lot of empathy for people who are struggling in those areas, spend a lot of time with people in those struggles to learn what their pain points are, what their struggles are, what their needs are, and you spend that time researching to reach out to them. So that's basically it in a nutshell, the chapters I covered. I will pass it on to, I'm guessing we're going to have to pass it on to you, Brandy, because
Me, yes, yes,
Norma
or pass
stepped
it
away
on
for
to
just a bit.
me. Which is good because you addressed setting a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about setting with chapters 13 and 14. Chapter 13 is defining setting and observation. Be it fiction or nonfiction, setting is both the backdrop and environment for your content. St. John likens it to a nervous system of a story with conflict as the backbone. And setting includes a diverse number of elements, such as era, terrain, and weather, but it can also include such elements as accents and idioms, customs, traditions, religion. It can provide historical background and cultural attitudes, and it also assumes the role of a character sometimes. So, setting will help characterize, it's emotional, it's revealing, it creates tone and atmosphere for your story, and it affects characters and therefore will affect readers. So, St. John really encourages that you choose the settings that will have the best impact on your characters if it's fiction. And I will say for your reader, if it's nonfiction, that will convey the transformations or information you want to convey to your reader through character experience or the informational content, whether you have a devotional or creative nonfiction or a human interest piece. Setting affects that very well. So, what can setting do for your story or for your article or whatever piece you're writing in nonfiction? Engaging real feel settings increases reader involvement and care for what you're talking about. St. John says that at first, setting must be implied rather than described, because in fiction, readers need to see the character in action quickly. Well, that doesn't mean that the immediate place is absent. You might say, have a general idea, like a train station or a family estate, or give a general idea of where your character is initially. Because if you don't do that, then your character can end up a little floating in space, but you don't want to go into great detail. You work those details in later as the story progresses and you have more space to do that. In human interest nonfiction, on the other hand, you'll often see that writers will sometimes set the scene with very detailed descriptive elements that are part of a subject matter's life that maybe you might overlook or you wouldn't know about that person. And they use this to appeal to your senses, to introduce you to what they want to talk about, to get you to care about their story. In writing settings, St. John encourages you to start with sight first, then sound, smell, taste, and touch, and she expounds on each one. I don't know if you have to necessarily follow that order. It's not a hard and fast rule, I don't think, like it is for motivation, action, and conflict. But it's a good idea. And I will say that many people will accidentally omit the senses of smell or taste. They're a little bit more elusive sometimes because a lot of times we'll think of, what you see first. We're always focusing on what you see. But the olfactory senses are very, very important and they tend to ground our memories. And so if you can evoke odors and put them into your writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you call up the sweet scent of strawberries, and sometimes people just their mouths start watering. So they instantly connect because they've had that experience. So think about putting those things in, not just focusing on only one type of sensory detail. Setting can help you establish the tone you want for your story or your information. It can convey interesting facts, but use it sparingly because you want to use a setting only as it fits your piece. You don't want to go hog wild and just choose something that really doesn't match the content or the theme of your story. Settings can unify scenes and plot threads, can unify theme, even in nonfiction. Setting can tighten suspense or alleviate tension. It can explain, motivate, or change a character. You think about the setting of all the people on the Titanic. It changed everything. And it can establish reader expectations. If you have somebody that is on an abandoned island and they've been left there and they have no way to get off, that establishes some very strong reader expectations that there are going to be some very difficult challenges ahead. So then I jumped ahead to dialogue with chapter 22, revealing character through speech. So dialogue reveals character. Think about if you use choppy words, short sentences, blunt consonant sounds, or flowing words that lilt through the air like petals floating on the gentle summer breeze to reach their longed-for resort. The types of word choices you make can reveal things about your character. Maybe that character has got no time for anybody else. And they're just going to do and on their way. Or they may be flowery. So dialogue can be really interesting in how you use it. Dialogue combined with thoughts and actions can also unveil a goal, motivation, or inner conflict. It can show insecurities, hint at deep-seated trouble. Might not know it's there, but you can get a really strong sense something else is going on here that the character's not telling. It can deliver information, especially nonfiction. That's often used for that. Escalate tension. If you think about an article in a newspaper, sometimes there will be quotes from people in the community where they have very heightened emotions about certain topics. And so those will show through in those dialogue pieces. Dialogue creates emotion or an emotional tone, and it can reveal things such as faith, confidence, incompetence, shyness, privilege, or education. You think about somebody that uses very high words. Christ is a propitiation for our sins, or Christ took the wrath of God for us. It gives a very different idea of what kind of person is by how they deliver their dialogue. So dialogue moves the story or nonfiction point forward in some way, always. If it doesn't belong. Functionally, it breaks up chunks of text and makes reading easier than digesting lots of exposition. Think about when you have huge paragraphs, one right after the other, and very little white space. And then if you have a bunch of dialogue, there's a lot of white space you can just read through easier. It just feels a little bit smoother going, whereas the others can be like, ugh. So dialogue in fiction is not real speech. Surprise! It exists because there is an issue at stake, is what St. John says. So dialogue in fiction is cultivated to embody the heart of what a real conversation might be in a given situation, less the irrelevant facts, like how the weather is. And its purpose is to issue or give information, show character, show aspirations or motives authentic to the speaker, or and to create conflict. Often you want to pair these things with more than just one reason that conflict is there. If you can do double or triple duty with dialogue, do it. If you can create conflict, show character and aspirations at the same time, do it. So some tips with this. Dialogue can reveal research, but don't go wild because you don't want to be showing your author, so to speak. Don't let your authorness show. Also, be careful to avoid informing the reader. Same reason, information should come across naturally. And if it feels forced or like information is just there for the reader's sake and the characters don't really need to know it, then consider, does it really belong? If you take it out, will your story survive or your article survive without it? If the story or the article needs to survive, where can you fit it in where it best belongs and the characters need to know? Or if it's in an article, sometimes you have a lot of great quotes, then you just want to get them in there because they're fantastic, but it's like you feel like it's being stuffed. Pay attention to that little nudge there, because chances are you need to choose between a couple and you need to choose probably one. Dialogue in nonfiction is carefully chosen from actual speech to convey authenticity and give information, support, or emphasis to a nonfiction point. In creative nonfiction, fictional dialogue takes more of a center stage, but only the dialogue is taken from real life as best as the dialogue can be remembered. So in creative nonfiction, there's a little blend of it really happened, but you might not remember everything in great detail. So you kind of have to remember the gist of what the conversation was and then create fictional dialogue to give the truth that was there. Because sometimes you don't remember verbatim, and that's okay. Make dialogue unique to each character or speaker, particularly in fiction. If you have to keep going back to the beginning of the chapter or to some marked point in your book to figure out who is speaking, then that's an indicator that your characters don't sound unique enough. There are a lot of books and good resources on how to do that, so I recommend looking into those. Let's see. In nonfiction, it can really help to vary your sources so that your quotes from people will have different voices and you'll have a little bit more flavor in your article. St. John discusses dialogue and communication differences between men and women with a reminder that there will be outliers. Not everybody's going to follow each way. Her main takeaways to remember when crafting dialogue. These are interesting. Men are wired to fix things, while most women talk to build emotional connections and relationships. Men ask questions because they want answers, while women tend to ask questions to start conversations. Men speak directly, while women tend to make more suggestions. And men are more apt to talk about accomplishments, while women tend to downplay them. Now, some little something interesting that I have kind of seen in my life is when there is a woman that spends more time around men, they will pick up more male communication styles. And likewise with men who spend a little bit more time raised around women, they tend to pick up more female communication styles. So it's kind of interesting if you kind of open your ears and listen to the people around you. How are they speaking to see what those patterns are? To keep speech as authentic as possible, she recommends following the motivation pattern that's true to life, where we feel, then act, and then speak. Action can be omitted, but always maintain that order or it will feel wrong to your readers because that's just how life is. And somewhere in the book, she mentions Dwight V. Swain's motivation reaction units. That is from his book, Techniques of the Selling Writer. It's a very good book. It's a little on the older side, but its information still holds true. I highly recommend that. And real quick, chapter 23, because it's not very long, but it is expressing emotion with omission. What is not said, but could have been said, often speaks volumes. When words allude to a meaning different than what is actually said, this is called subtext. Some people are not good at picking up subtext and respond to literal words. That can be an interesting thing to put into your pieces if it fits. Sometimes it's better to show a person's character and beliefs by the way by what they do and how they care or don't care, rather than saying. So, she uses the example of Princess Leia and how, instead of saying, I care about my people, no, it's demonstrated by how she lives for them to fight for them. Sometimes it's better to show, yep, I said that. If a character says one thing and then does another, contradicting their words, what do you think a reader's going to gather from that? Probably that who they really are is more in line with what they do than what they say, right? So you can use that in your pieces as well. The shell, oh, they say this, but they do that. And you can use that to cause the reader to think in that way, if that fits your piece. But these are some of the things that I've picked up from chapters 13 and 14 on setting, and chapter 23 and 22 and 23 on dialogue. And I'm going to turn it over to Norma to take us the rest of the way. I think she's got a little bit of something on setting as well, and I believe she's going to be focusing mostly on nonfiction.
Just
Yes,
before we
mostly on
do,
nonfiction. But before we do that, we go
Mhm.
ahead, Melissa.
I was gonna say we got some questions and
Yep.
comments in the chat that were pertaining to what you were saying.
Sure.
Thought maybe they'd be good to address now.
Yeah.
Dennis brought up the question: how do we show tone of voice in dialogue?
Tone of voice. Melissa, do you have any good answers for that? Because I know you really work a lot with that in your characters.
Emotion is oftentimes the best one. I know there's the stereotypes and things you definitely want to avoid. Like some people want to do the all caps for shouting or always doing the exclamation
Avoid
marks,
the
but
exclamation
sometimes,
points. Yep.
yes, a lot of times the tone can be conveyed in the word choice along with action beats. And so you can get an idea of what the character is doing by the combination of the words that they say and how they react while they're saying it. Now, sometimes you can go a little over the top with action beats, so you want to watch it. You're not only saying like he whispered or he leaned in, every single thing to make it like a play-by-play, which I always have to watch myself on. Sometimes I make things a little too play-by-play with my action beats, but you can be strategic about them and convey tone that way.
Sometimes you can use setting to convey tone as well, by commenting of the tree, like the leaves on the trees just hung low, and connect that to the character's emotions, as something, like this day would be difficult to get through or something like that. And you can set a tone in that way. So you can use things around the character as well.
Circumstance for sure in setting. I have a scene in my first book where I have two characters running away from Viking raiders, and they go and they hide in a special location that they knew about that the raiders didn't know about. And I don't think that in the scene I ever talk about whispering or hushed voices, but because I speak about things in a close quartered way and I talk about darkness and things like that, and some movements that are very, you could only experience if you were close up, you just naturally know any speaking that happens is very hushed and minimal. There's not much at all because the pressure's on to not be found. Otherwise, bad things ensue. So yeah, use your setting and your character's responses as much as the dialogue choice to get a tone, I think.
And you can use your character's body language to show also.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
Slumped shoulders. What's the word I'm looking for? Raised eyebrows. Little things that you can weave in of your character's body language can also, like Jerry Jenkins gave an example one time of, instead of saying, you know, your character exhaled and sat on the couch. Well, what does that look like? He slumped back to the couch. So what is that? Based on what's happening, you can pick up an emotion on slumping on the couch versus telling too much. And does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Share some of the tone through body language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we can read other people's, even when they're trying to control their tone. Boy, sometimes that body language is screaming loud and clear, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and real quick, too, word choice, digging into that a little deeper. Brandy touched on it, where you use like very short, stunted sentences, using your punctuation and things like that, or long, flowing words. That can also convey a tone. Whether a person is out of breath, you might be cutting them off mid-word or something like that. Showing an abrupt interruption from another character. You can assume that the person interrupting is either talking really fast over the top of them or talking loud. David had a comment. Assuming I heard correctly, which is often debatable, I'll disagree slightly that everything dialogue always has to move the plot forward. It could be used to paint or flesh out characters' nature, or provide a breathing point for the reader, or help anchor a scene in our setting.
Well, I would argue that if you are characterizing, you are helping to move the plot forward, because you are moving forward story, which is a character's inward development.
Mm-hmm. That's something a lot of times people separate. They don't always realize the connection between character and plot. They kind of see them two separate entities rather than two things that marry together to create the whole. And so, yeah, anytime you're pausing to develop a character more, if that's important to the plot and the characters and motivations and stuff, well, yeah, that development is essential.
Yeah, I tend to think of a story as being comprised of plot, which is more like external elements, and then story, which is more the inward development, because there always has to be an inward path that the character follows, whether it's starting high and going low, starting low, going high, starting high, going low, then high. I mean, there's all different ways that you can do it, but the inward journey of the character is always intertwined with the outer events of plot.
Absolutely. Well, I'll segue it over to you then again, Norma. I think that was it for now.
Great.
All right. Good discussion. I love it. The chapters I chose to focus more towards nonfiction, because that's what I write. First, I'll start with chapter 10, which is word pictures. Whether you write fiction or nonfiction, creating good word pictures, again, it helps convey the message without doing more showing than necessary, or probably adds into the default of show. Character, think about the last book you read. Why? What made you like the main character? Mostly because they had struggles and they were believable, right? It's hard to like a character or either your antagonist or protagonist if they don't seem real, if they seem too good to be true. It makes it easy to kind of like to like them and to follow the story, unless conflict, as you both talked about, comes up at some point. What is it about an article, a devotional, or a nonfiction book that impacts you? Again, it comes back to it's believable or it's relatable. You write what's happening in a way that your reader can absolutely not just be drawn into your story, because even writing nonfiction, we're still telling a story. But they relate in such a way to what you're saying that they begin to sympathize or empathize with what you're explaining in the story. You want, the other thing she talks about in chapter 10 is you want to pull the reader in with word pictures. A word picture, it describes or tells a story. It's almost like a parable versus just coming out and saying. For example, tell me which draws more emotion or more thought, makes you want to think more about what's happening. If this is dialogue, you never have time for me, she said. Or, compared to everything else you're devoted to, the time you give me feels like no more than a scant serving of stale crumbs. Which one do you think feels a little more emotional?
I would say it depends on if you're a guy or girl.
Correct. Correct. Yes. If
But
you're,
yes, the second one is definitely more, you can like, yeah, I got that. I see what she's saying.
mhm. But if a wife said this to her husband, you men on here can speak up in the chat. I think that would speak a little more clearly to how she's really feeling, besides, you don't have time for me. Oh, here she goes on another rant, right? Come on, guys, speak up, back me up here. Um, but that's the point of a word picture, is you don't just come out and say what's wrong. You build a little bit of a story that expresses how you're really feeling. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that most of us would agree that if a story or an article is not compelling, we're not going to keep reading, right? If it doesn't pull us in enough, regardless of fiction or nonfiction, we're not going to keep reading. And it's not very often that once a reader closes that book, that they'll pick it back up and try again. It does happen sometimes, but it's not real often. David says, why use 20 words when 6 will do? True. And it also will depend on your character. If it's a man, and especially a non-chatty man like my husband, the 6 words would be better than all the fluff and stuff, as he calls it. Mm-hmm. So, how are some ways that we can make our stories compelling? Well, Cheryl St. John says using what she calls givens. A given is an emotional connection that happens pretty much automatically. Or triggers a pretty much an automatic reaction. Think about babies, laughing babies. Those reels are super popular on Facebook and Instagram of the babies with the deep belly laughs. That automatically evokes most people. As soon as they see one of those, they at least smile if they don't laugh along. Dogs and cats, military, first responders, death of a loved one. All of those things, she says, evokes an automatic response one way or the other. Maybe if you were mistreated by police, that's automatically going to evoke a real negative emotion. But if you had a policeman come to your rescue, that's hearing about a policeman is going to bring about um, a very loving, thankful type of response. But your story can't or article can't just depend on the givens. It needs to be supported by good story with a relatable victory of some sort. Not all stories are happy ending, but there is still some kind of victory in a sense of they made it through to the other side. The person, no, they didn't marry that sweetheart, he died or whatever, but they're still here. So there's some sense of a victory. And one of the things she says, I'm going to read this quote directly. The way to set up a character generates emotion for the reader, and the manner in which you lead the reader through a scene evokes feelings. Invest the reader in the scene by playing into those things that trigger strong reactions. So we want to have these givens, but like everything else we've said, we want to use them sparingly because we don't want to beat our readers over the head with trope and cliches. The next chapter I chose to look at was chapter 15, which talks about using indirect description. As Brandy and Melissa have already said, setting is key, even in nonfiction. I had this said to a person said this to me one time when I was presented a piece to be critiqued. I was talking about two people, and they said, in my mind, I just see these two heads floating around white space. I need a little bit more information to tell me where this is happening or where they are, so that my brain can kind of fill it in. So we want to make sure that we give them enough information that they can see what's going on, and they're, instead of continuing to read, or as they continue to read, they're thinking, wait, who is this person, or what's happening in the background. So we don't want to leave too much of that. Most of us, I'm sure, are glad that purple prose is no longer a thing. And for those of you that may not know what purple prose is, it is a lengthy, very detailed, like not leaving anything out kind of description of a setting or a scene or what's happening.
I've still seen purple prose. It's still a thing.
It's still out there, and some do it, but most publishers really shy away from that. It's not as popular as it used to be.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be in print.
Correct. And often the purple prose comes from when people are just, they have so much good research that they've done and great information and have this pictured out perfectly in their mind, and they want the reader to be exactly where they are. And how can they get there without all this information? But I like what Jerry Jenkins has said in the past. You write enough of the scene so that your reader knows where it is, where things are happening, but you leave the rest to engage the theater of the reader's mind. How many of us have read books that didn't have purple prose, and our minds conjured up its own idea of what a character looked like? For example, Jerry Jenkins, as many may know, he wrote the Left Behind series. And the antagonist, Nikolai Carpathia, that was how I said it in my brain. When they made the movie, they said his name differently, and he looked very different than what I imagined. But that's okay. That's what you want. You want your words to bring about or cause the theater of your reader's mind to just create its own continuing of the setting. Excuse me. Trying to see if I forgot anything. So it's not important, Cheryl says, in what's happening. What is important is how your character is reacting to what's happening. The same goes for setting. What's important is how your characters are reacting to their setting. Create setting with this in mind, or twist it to fit your purpose. So it's not so much, as she said, about what's happening, but show, as we've talked a little bit about already, your character's reaction. Indirect description is your character's reaction to the setting, the reaction that stirs up emotion in the reader that brings about sympathy or empathy. An example of this might be, instead of just saying she came in on a very cold day and warmed her hands by the fire, you could change that to warming her chilled hands by the fire and go on from there. If her hands are chilled, you know she's cold, without coming right out and saying she's cold. So that's an example of an indirect description. The next chapter I want to talk about, if I can get my phone to cooperate here, is chapter 27. I had a little bit more notes on these, but for the sake of time, I'm going to Reader's Digest condensed version. The last thing I want to talk about is chapter 37, The Reader Must Care. And I've kind of alluded to that a little bit. Cheryl says, you can have the cleverest plot ever and use perfect grammar, but if you don't create people your audience will identify with and root for or hate, as the case may be, you don't have a book worthy of publishing. I don't know about you, but sometimes reading a book or watching TV, there's an antagonist that I'm just like, would somebody just shoot him right between the eyes, please? Would they just shoot him? I'm rooting for him in a way to get him out of the way from antagonizing the good guy. And that makes me root even more for the good guy, for the hero. However, even in nonfiction, we don't have a protagonist and antagonist necessarily, but we still want to pull our readers in and make them care about whether we're sharing an autobiographical article or story. We want them to care about us on the paper, to be invested enough to hear, because we write our words. Why? Because we want to impact people for Jesus Christ, whether we're writing fiction, nonfiction, or both, regardless of the genre. Most genres, I'll say.
It's particularly true of essays, because that is the whole point of an essay, to get the reader to care about your topic.
Exactly. An example that Cheryl brings out in making the person you're writing about believable is she brings out Indiana Jones and says, would his character have been so believable to us if he had, without hesitation, jumped right into that pit of snakes? Probably not, because the majority of people hate snakes. And when they saw that pit, were just, even people that like snakes still might not find his actions super believable. Excuse me. Without sharing, sorry, another one I thought of was The Hiding Place. If Corrie ten Boom had not shared some of the really dark sides, so to speak, of what it was like being in a Nazi concentration camp, what it felt like to be snatched from a home, packed into a train so tight, people were fainting and nobody knew it because there was no room for them to collapse. Without sharing such detail, vivid detail, we wouldn't have cared about, oh, she's another survivor. Yay, okay, good for her. Sorry it happened. But the way she shares her story just pulls you in and your heart just breaks for her. So
I think
think
it's
about
natural
that.
for us to want to automatically put ourselves in somebody else's place and consider how would I do, how would I be if I were that? Even if we don't say those words, our minds instantly go, ugh, because what if that were me?
Right, exactly. And that's what we want. That's what we want. And we achieve that by not giving too much information, but just enough that tugs at the heartstrings and makes the reader really jump in. And the last thing I want to share is she said just that, share enough background and the forces that shape the person you're writing about so the reader accepts the character's actions, fears, and outcomes. An example of this, a personal example, if you will, is I've written a few articles about a time when I was in the hospital with COVID. And instead of talking very generally about people that were sick and hospitalized and died during the time of COVID, and it was a terrible time, glad it's over, that's very boring. But if I wrote, I'm admitting you to the hospital, the ER doctor said, the first thought that broke through the COVID brain fog was my cousin's death just 3 days ago. Fear grabbed my heart and squeezed. Which one makes you maybe feel more of the story, feel even makes you want to be interested in what happens next? The generalization or the one with just a little bit of background? So we want to pull the reader in. I know I've quoted Jerry Jenkins quite a bit here too, but as I've read through this, different of his very well-known sayings came to mind throughout this. And one of the things he often says also is whether you write fiction or nonfiction, you want to grab the reader by the throat and don't let them go. And that's kind of violent, but in a sense, as far as you want to grab them by the, I guess you could say, the intrigue throat of their mind, maybe, I don't know. But you want to make the opening so compelling that they're, oh, I got to find out what's next, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. And that is what I have for you from my three parts of this wonderful book. And if you don't have this book, I would highly, as I'm sure Melissa and Brandy would, highly recommend this book. It a lot of great tips. She has tons of examples in this book that we didn't even get into about different books and movies and long sections of quotes to make her point throughout the book. But it's really a fantastic book, and I would strongly recommend, if you don't have it, to go ahead and check it out. Whether you write fiction or nonfiction. And that is all we have for you today. We're so glad you were here. And if you're watching on our Facebook, YouTube channel, thank you for watching. And if you have a free Tuesday morning, 11 o'clock Eastern Time, check out our Facebook members page and see how to join us live. Next week, we're going to
Surprise
Melissa.
you.
We're going to surprise you.
Yes.
You know what? I like that. It's going to be a surprise.
Next week
Because
will
it'll
be
be a surprise to us too, because we're not quite sure yet.
exactly.
Yep.
Some of our audience will be next week is the Blue Ridge Mountains Christian Writers Conference. And if you're going, let me know. Message me on Facebook and we'll make a time to get together and see if we can get enough of us from Writers Chat that are there to get a Writers Chat group picture, and we can share it on our Facebook members page.
Yep. Melissa and I will be holding down the fort here.
Yes, yes. And they do a fantastic job of holding down the fort. That's for sure. And I'm sure next week will be wonderful. And that is all I have. Melissa, Brandy, anything else you want to share before we close out?
I will just comment to everybody that happens to be here that if you are in-house, you are in our Facebook members group, you will get the notice that we do meet on Fridays. Now we're open to all Writers Chat members, not just for fiction. We used to have a fiction meeting on Fridays, but now it's for anybody that wants to come for writing, chat, and support. It's a good time to connect. It's not focused on teaching, it's more focused on connecting as community, asking questions, and often getting some writing in. So if you are around on Friday, we will be here. Same room, same time, but you'll get a notice if you're in our Facebook group, and that's another reason to come join us on Facebook.
For sure.
One
Y'all
day we
have
might have a different home besides Facebook group, but for now, that's where it is.
right. Well, enjoy the rest of your week. I will miss you next week, but I will enjoy the conference, I'm sure. See y'all in 2 weeks. Everybody else be back next week. Have a great one.
And for now, stay for the after party.
Yep. Don't
Yes.
forget the after party. And if you are just watching the replay and you want to be a part of the after party, join the Facebook groups and then you can be here live with us on Tuesdays.
Yep.
See you, everybody.